28 Years Later is the third installment in the 28 Days Later horror franchise, except in this case the scariest thing about it isn't the zombies or the commentary on the human condition, but the fact that someone took a look at this script and actually decided to produce it. As such, I've decided to make several small videos breaking down the movie and how it just doesn't work. Seeing as how the only bit of the film currently available to me in the UK is the opening scene because I'm not paying 14 fucking pounds for this shite, let's talk about the opening scene. We focus on Jimmy and a group of children watching TV in a living room, with his family living in a sheltered alcove in the Scottish Highlands. As their auntie forces them to sit still and close the door on them, the infected burst in shortly afterwards, with everyone in the house except Jimmy dying. Jimmy escapes to the nearby church where his dad, the vicar, tells him that the infection is God's judgment, giving him his crucifix and telling him to be strong before allowing the infected to turn him. Jimmy later escapes from the church, disappearing into the wilderness for parts unknown. You know, when I first saw the trailers for this movie, I was excited that they were going to show the initial outbreak and how terrifying it would be, especially from the perspective of a child. But now I just struggle to know how I'm supposed to take this seriously. For a start, the Scottish Highlands, more specifically this part where the movie was shot, is a full 7 days walk from Cambridge, where the infection first started. That means that you would need to walk to this location without any deviations for 7 full days straight in order to get to it. The problem with this is that's not how the infected work. The infected wouldn't be going straight to this direction. They would be running around and investigating every single source of possible life in the nearby area before moving on. Depending on the size of these settlements, the infected might spend hours to days going through them before moving to find new prey to kill. We even see in 28 Days Later that the infection was still being fought in Manchester a week or so before the group arrived, before the city was set on fire and the military blockade was forced to flee to the mansion. On top of this, we know that by the second week, vital systems like water pressure and electricity had started to fail, and the news broadcast stopped as the exodus of Britain was in order. So the news must have been broadcasting information about the infected at the end of the first week, start of the second at the latest. In fact, we know the survivors understand how the virus functions because they have this bit of dialogue with each other. So you have a small group of individuals living in this remote location, far away from the initial outbreak point in an area surrounded by hills and mountains, who are clearly aware of what's going on, and yet they decide to just sit here and wait to die? Barricade your homes, just flee to another area, and you're telling me there's no place nearby that you could have gotten yourself a boat and evacuated on? But apparently not, because despite the fact the TV broadcasts are still working, meaning it's not too far into the outbreak, and the fact they know what the infection is, the adults have decided to just sit around doing fuck all, and the infected have somehow managed to make their way all the way over here. Because that makes sense. The infected burst into the room and Jimmy escapes, not closing the door behind him. We can see as Jimmy runs, the infected must have come from one of these areas here, as he approaches his mum in the kitchen and she seems to be getting attacked from an infected that has come through the entrance in the kitchen, not from out here. So the mum saw and heard several infected banging on the living room door and didn't try and save the children in any way, despite how selflessly she sacrifices herself here. On top of this, the infected not only attack the living room, but walk right next to the kitchen to go upstairs and attack the people there, yet none of them decide to go after this woman who is completely out in the open next to them. To add to the bullshit, Jimmy attempts to go upstairs, only for an infected to throw one of the family members down onto the little landing, as his auntie starts to become fully infected on the landing next to him. And then the kitchen glass door breaks, with his mum starting to become infected as the infected walk through the door. So to sum up the predicament he's in, there's 4 infected that should be attacking him now that the kids are dead or infected, there's the mum and the 3 other infected that burst through the door after her, there's another infected that made his way upstairs to attack his other family members, and there's 1, possibly 2 infected family members upstairs with him. And not only do none of them attack him, but some of them don't even seem to acknowledge his existence at all. And then the smash cut happens. Yep. That's what happens. A 10-year-old boy about to get demolished by infected above and below him with nowhere to go, and then the shot just switches and he's magically fine. I'm being serious, where can he go here? He's surrounded on all sides. So he makes his way to the church, not being pursued by the dozens of infected in the house, and then he sees some other infected crawling up the hill, with him opening the church doors right when the infected reach the top of the hill. Despite the infected being right there, and the doors being left open by Jimmy, The infected then proceed to chill outside for 30 seconds so Jimmy and his dad can have a conversation, proceeding to burst in only after he's given his crucifix to Jimmy. And after infecting the dad, they then all proceed to just follow this one specific infected instead of searching for the small child that is yelling at God beneath them. And this character, what a incoherent mess he is.
Nothing that hasn't been most perfectly foretold. Not dead, saved. This is a glorious day. A day of judgment.
Alright, so you're very devoted to your faith, you believe that the rage virus is a message from God, and that the infection is a gift for his chosen that he still loves. And you also love your son. And yet when the time comes, you don't let him get God's gift and instead tell him to run. But Loomar, he's insane. Okay, and insane doesn't necessarily mean incoherent. From his point of view, the rage virus makes perfect logical sense, but he just lets Jimmy go so the sequel can happen apparently. And so there you have the opening scene, an idea that could have worked wonderfully with better choreography and set in a more realistic location, instead turned into an absolute shit show of plot armor and nonsense world building. Let's keep talking about the world building now that I've brought that up. Based on the information that just the films give us, the infection happened, it died out, NATO and the US military moved in to cleanse the country. They allowed some refugees to come back. They discover Alice and realise that she's a carrier for the virus gets back out, everyone once again dies, and the infection makes its way to Paris. First off, these survivors on Holy Island aren't going to be living there anymore. There would have been surveillance and boats searching for survivors, and as soon as they were found they should have been rescued, just like what happened with Don. These people either should have been kept on the mainland in quarantine zones before being moved to the re-establishment zone like Don was, or moved to Europe to live in the refugee camps. Instead, it appears that these people moved here during the initial outbreak and then have just never had any interaction with anyone else since, even though we know that after the first outbreak the military was actively looking to rescue people, and these aren't hard to spot. Secondly, you're telling me the outside world has just completely given up on helping people on mainland Britain? I get they don't want to risk anything by personally bringing things to them, but they haven't even bothered to airdrop supplies down or use drones. There's no charity or relief efforts trying to help out, which is especially egregious considering Holy Island is the main settlement we follow, and they haven't been contacted either, despite the fact they can only be accessed by one very heavily guarded place. You could just drive boats up to the island and meet with them. It's just baffling. Thirdly, I don't think the infected should just be roaming around in these big groups in the first place. You have an island full of people infected with something that turns people into rage-blind, death-dealing lunatics, and no one has bothered to sort this out. Everyone is cool with Zombie Island being a thing. This isn't something you can just wait out, especially considering you don't know what might happen. One day you woke up and had to nuke Paris because you thought this would just be contained to the UK. This is an active threat that, as far as these governments know, could pop up anywhere. Why haven't you started to take it out? It's been nearly 30 years and you have unmanned drones now if you really don't want anyone going on the mainland. I find it genuinely hilarious that this movie expects me to believe that everyone was fine with a virus that wiped out 50 million people in 3 weeks, just chilling on the UK. I find it even stupider that they would do this because they're aware of mutations in the virus. The first strain showed very little signs of self-preservation. The second showed increased intelligence and a desire to infect people instead of just kill them. And as evident by the official webpage that talks about the outside world's observations of the infected, they are aware they're working in packs and mutating into alphas. What if it jumps to another species? What if it becomes airborne? This isn't really a chance you can just take, and yet they're fine with it. So, pretty good start, isn't it? Thanks for watching, lads and lasses. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing and checking out some of my other videos. Sharing always helps, and if you're feeling really generous, please consider my Patreon or YouTube membership. I also have a Twitter and occasionally I do live streams. But most of all, I just hope you had a great day and hopefully I will see you in the next video.